Hi, everybody, and welcome to Know What You're Talking About. Today we're looking at Topic 6, DQ1. This week we're talking about money and banking and how these things affect the size of the money supply. For most students, it's kind of a new area, and it's a really interesting area. So let's take a look at the DQ. The role of a bank is to move funds from savers to spenders. What happens when saving rates are too high? An example would be people saving so much money that the banks cannot keep up. Would you agree that the United States is in this situation now? What could the Federal Reserve do to help solve that problem? Well, the first thing you should know is that when this question talks about savings rates, they're not talking about the interest rates on savings account. That's a different thing. They're talking about savings rates. How much of their income is the average person putting into savings? If I make $100 this week, am I putting $10 into savings or $90 into savings? The savings rate. So, before we go much further, we should also look at what's required for this DQ. Because as it stands right there, it skips some key steps of logic. And so we want to connect those dots in our answers. So let's look at, class, please read how to get full credit for posts in this discussion forum right here and see what I'm requiring. So what it says is, number 1, explain how banks create money. Check out the attached PowerPoint, Money and Banking, slides 6 and 7. So the PowerPoint is attached right here, as you can see, and let's see what slides 6 and 7 have to say. Slide 6, cash is what we usually think of money, but that's only a tiny part of the total M2 money supply. The big part is in the transaction deposits. And how is the money in transaction accounts and savings accounts created? These bank accounts are not lump sums of money. We sometimes might think that when you take money to the bank that they take it in the back and they put it in a little cubby with your name on it. No. They keep track of what they owe you, but the money moves around. And really, the only thing you have for a bank account are some computer data entries. Banks create money by making loans. Interesting way that happens. And this is discussed right here in this money and banking video or PowerPoint. This money and banking PowerPoint is going to be an essential part of being able to understand this well. So be sure that you look at the slides that are required. This tells you exactly how banks create money. They loan money that when one customer deposits money, they loan that money to another customer, and that creates money. And there's more on this here in this PowerPoint. So the second point is talk about how the size of the money supply impacts the general economy. And we're supposed to look at the money and banking PowerPoint slide 5. So let's do that. Here's the answer to the question. How much money is available? The size of the money supply affects consumers' ability to purchase goods and services. If there's a lot of money available, if people have money, and especially if people are able to easily borrow money, they'll buy more things. And when people buy more things, all of those individual demands, those individual consumers buying more things, creates aggregate demand. Aggregate demand just means all added together. If you take all the individuals, added together, you get aggregate demand. And if the money supply is large or growing, that means that especially financing is easy to get. That means that all the individuals are demanding more goods and services. That means aggregate demand is increasing. The third point, talk about what would happen if saving rates got too high. So, so earlier when we looked at the PowerPoint, we saw that banks increase the money supply by making loans. Well, if everybody deposited money into the bank and nobody wanted to borrow money from the bank, that would stop that cycle, right? And so that would change the money supply, and the money supply, of course, affects the economy, as we saw in point 2. And finally, talk about how the Federal Reserve could increase the bank's ability to make loans. Look at slide 8. So let's go over to the PowerPoint. Slide 8 tells us the Fed controls a bank's ability to create money by making loans. Bank reserves, assets held by the bank to fulfill its deposit obligations. The Federal Reserve could increase the required reserves. And when the reserves go up, well, then that changes what banks can loan out. Likewise, when the reserve requirement goes down, that also makes money easier to get. This is one point. There are other ways that the Federal Reserve can affect this, and these are covered in your textbook. And these include, let's go over to the textbook. These include by increasing or decreasing the interest rate they charge to banks, and this also includes buying and selling bonds, and you'll see that discussed in the textbook. So those are the key points that you'll want to cover here. And the main thing is you really want to look at this PowerPoint, because this PowerPoint really helps to clarify the key points from our textbook and from other sources so that you can understand something about how money moves around in the economy. So key points: savings rate does not reflect the interest rate. Savings rate just means what percentage of income are people saving. And then if people saved money but nobody ever borrowed money, how would that affect the economy? And you're going to want to look at that in terms of stopping the bank's ability to create money through loans. And you're going to look then at how that would affect aggregate demand if the money supply could not grow. And finally, you're going to want to look in your textbook in chapters 9 and 10 at the tools that the Federal Reserve has that would allow it to increase the bank's ability to make loans. And those tools include changing the required reserve rate. They include changing the interest rate that they charge banks to borrow from the Federal Reserve. And that also includes buying and selling of government bonds to increase the money supply. And with those pieces of information, I think you're ready to go. You can give me a great answer to this question. I can give you 100% on this DQ, and everybody will be happy. I look forward to seeing you next time on Know What You're Talking About.